The air at 26,000 feet does not support life. At the South Col, the final camp before the summit of Mount Everest, the atmosphere contains only 1/3 of the oxygen found at sea level. This is the dead zone. On the night of May 9, 1996, two major commercial expeditions prepared to enter it. Adventure consultants, led by the legendary Rob Hall, and Mountain Madness, led by the charismatic Scott Fisher. Rob Hall was a perfectionist. A New Zealander with 5 Everest summits to his name, he was known for his methodical, safe approach. His lead client was Doug Hansen, a postal worker from Washington who had failed to summit the year prior and was back for one last shot. Beside them was John Krakauer, a journalist on assignment for Outside Magazine, documenting the rise of commercialized climbing. By midnight, the temperature had plummeted to 30 below zero. A long line of headlamps began to snake up the southeast ridge. The plan was simple but rigid: reach the summit by 2 p.m. The rule was clear: if you are not on the summit by 2 p.m., you turn around. No exceptions. Because on Everest, most people do not die going up. They die trying to come back down. You do not argue with the clock. As dawn broke over the Himalayas, the beauty of the top of the world was overshadowed by an ominous reality: a traffic jam. More than 30 climbers were vying for the same narrow, snowy ridge. At the Hillary Step, a 40-foot vertical wall of rock and ice just below the summit, the expedition encountered a fatal delay. The fixed ropes, which should have been installed by Sherpas ahead of time, were not in place. For over an hour, the world's most elite climbers and their high-paying clients stood shivering in the thin air, their bottled oxygen hissing away into the void. By the time the first climbers reached the summit, it was nearly noon. Anatoly Bukriv, the lead guide for Mountain Madness and one of the strongest high-altitude climbers in history, reached the peak first. He was followed by Krakauer. But behind them, the line was moving with agonizing slowness. Rob Hall's 2 p.m. turnaround time came and went. At the summit, the mood was celebratory, but the sky to the southwest was changing. The brilliant blue was being swallowed by a wall of bruised purple clouds. The barometer was dropping, a sign of a massive storm system moving in from the plains of India. Despite the late hour, Rob Hall waited. He was waiting for Doug Hansen. Hansen was struggling, moving with the lethargy of a man whose lungs were filling with fluid, but Hall was determined to get his friend to the top. They didn't reach the summit until after 4 p.m. It was a fatal mistake. As Hall and Hansen began their descent, the mountain vanished. A black blizzard struck with the force of a hurricane. Winds screamed at 70 miles per hour, whipping snow into a blinding whiteout that erased the trail. The temperature dropped to 70 degrees below zero. John Krakauer, moving ahead of the storm, managed to reach his tent at the South Col by the skin of his teeth, though he was hallucinating from hypoxia. Behind him, the mountain became a graveyard. Lower down the ridge, a group of 11 climbers, including Mountain Madness guide Neil Beidelman and several clients, became hopelessly lost in the whiteout. They were only a few hundred yards from the safety of the camp, but they couldn't see their hands in front of their faces. They huddled together in a huddle of death to share body heat, waiting for a break in the storm. Back at the Hillary Step, Rob Hall was in a desperate situation. Doug Hansen had collapsed. Hall refused to leave him. He radioed down to base camp, his voice crackling through the static. He was exhausted, and his oxygen regulators were frozen. Doug is gone, Hall finally reported the next morning. Hansen had likely slipped or succumbed to the cold in the night. Now, Hall was alone, trapped on a narrow ledge with no hope of descent. While the storm raged, Anatoly Bukreev performed one of the most incredible rescue feats in mountaineering history. Having descended earlier, he realized his clients were missing. Without supplemental oxygen, in the middle of a blizzard that would knock a grown man off his feet, Bukreev plunged back into the darkness. He found the lost huddle on the South Col. One by one, he dragged the exhausted climbers back to the tents. He saved 3 lives that night, but he couldn't find everyone. Left behind in the snow were Beck Weathers and Yasuko Namba, both presumed dead, their bodies encased in ice. The most heartbreaking moment of the disaster occurred via radio. On the morning of May 11th, Rob Hall was still alive, but he was severely frostbitten and unable to move. Base Camp patched a satellite connection through to his home in New Zealand. Hall spoke to his wife, John Arnold, who was 7 months pregnant with their first child. He didn't tell her he was dying. He kept his voice calm. "Sleep well, my sweetheart," he told her. "Please don't worry too much." Those were his last recorded words. His body remains on the South Summit to this day. As the storm began to break, a search party went out to check on the bodies of Weathers and Namba. They found them buried in snow. Beck Weathers' face was a mask of black ice. His eyes were frozen shut. The rescuers concluded he was beyond help and left him to die with dignity rather than risk more lives to move a corpse. But Beck Weathers wasn't dead. In a feat of sheer biological defiance, Weathers regained consciousness. Driven by visions of his family, he stood up. Blind, his hands frozen into blocks of ice, he staggered through the wind toward what he hoped was the camp. To the shock of everyone at the South Col, a dead man walked into camp that evening. Though he would eventually lose both hands and his nose to frostbite, he survived. The 1996 disaster claimed 8 lives in a single 24-hour period, including the leaders of both major expeditions. Scott Fisher, the indomitable leader of Mountain Madness, also perished on the descent, his body discovered days later by his friend Lopsang Jangbu Sherpa. The tragedy sparked a global debate. Had Everest become too commercial? Were guides taking unnecessary risks to satisfy paying clients? John Krakauer's subsequent book, Into Thin Air, became a bestseller and fueled the controversy, particularly regarding the role of Anatoly Bukreev and the ethics of high-altitude guiding. Today, the disaster stands as a cautionary tale of human hubris. It serves as a reminder that no matter how much technology we bring or how much money we pay, we do not conquer Everest. The mountain merely allows us to visit. When the clouds close in and the barometer drops, the thin line between an adventure of a lifetime and a tragedy of history disappears into the white. The 1996 season remains one of the deadliest on record, but it did not stop the flow of climbers. If anything, the notoriety of that year only increased the mountain's allure. Yet, for those who were there, the echoes of the radio calls and the sight of the black blizzard remain a chilling testament to the power of the world's highest peak.